Sign the 4 pages by midnight, or I'll have security clear this room and she won't see you again." His voice sliced the air of ICU's 7 amperes, hard enough to make the monitor skip a beat. He was tall, elegant in a silk tie, loosened for effect, eyes like polished ice. "Your nurse leaves. The lawyer stays. Your signature, Father, now, or you die alone." The door clicked shut behind him, the storm outside pressing its wet palm against the window. It was late, 11:42 p.m., the kind of Boston night when the rain comes sideways and the ambulance lights smear like red paint across Street Gabriel Medical Center's glass. I stood between the bed and the door, one hand on the railing, the other on the old man's wrist, counting a pulse that had decided to misbehave just to keep us honest. "My name is Anna Miller. I am 62 years old, a medical surgical nurse who has lived more nights under hospital fluorescence than under my own kitchen light. People call me quiet. People call me stubborn. People do not call me late. On the night Richard Beaumont arrived, a billionaire whose name could hush a hallway, I was there before the first order was written, before the perfume of the VIP wing could climb the stairs, before the man's first fragile breath fogged the plastic of his oxygen mask. They wheeled him in on a gurney with chrome rails that squeaked like a confession. I remember the scar near his eyebrow, a pale hitch stitch from some war he never talked about, and the gray in his beard that caught the ICU's cold glow like frost on November shrubs. The nor'easter hammered the city. The power flickered, generators purred their steady promise, and the ceiling vents sighed as if praying over him. "Vitals Q15, I said, the way some people murmur grace. "Keep the fluids warm." I wiped the blood that threaded his nostril, the metallic smell thin as a penny under the antiseptic. He did not know me then. He didn't know anyone. But his chest rose, halting, obedient, as if not to embarrass a man who had once owned everything. By the time midnight moaned in the elevator cables, the visitors had been dismissed. The wealthy hate waiting rooms. They travel in lawyers. They speak in folders. They measure love in signatures. He lay there, the empire of his body besieged by the smallness of his breath, and I sat in a vinyl chair that had outlived 3 chiefs of medicine and 2 kinds of hope. His fingers twitched first 3 small taps against the sheet, like a code from a ship gone fog-blind. His eyelids lifted. Old money has a look, so does old regret. He found me, not as if I were special, only as if I were real. "Water," he rasped. I held the straw. He sipped. He coughed once, twice, a sound full of gravel and winter roads. "Who are you?" he asked. "Anna," I said. "Your night nurse." His gaze steadied on me like a lighthouse finding the seam of a wave. "Stay," he whispered. "Not them." His breath broke over the last word. "Not them." "The family?" I asked. He closed his eyes. It looked like a nod. Rain drummed 1,000 small fists against the glass. "I'll be here," I said. He didn't smile. Men like him have to relearn how. Morning found him a fraction stronger, which in ICU language means he could ask for less morphine and more truth. By noon the son arrived, the one with the tie and the jaw, Daniel Beaumont. He brought a lawyer with a careful haircut and a folder the color of new cherries. They wanted privacy. They wanted compliance. The lawyer spoke like an elevator that never stops long enough for you to get off. But Richard's voice, sandpaper over steel, came from the bed with a finality that turned everyone small. "If Anna leaves, you leave too. It is a strange thing, to be chosen by a dying man who has an entire city trained to stand at attention. Stranger still to be trusted for the one thing you cannot bill, your presence." I took his temperature. I counted his breaths. I wiped his lip with a warm cloth and pretended not to feel Daniel's stare, a cold assessment that measured me as if I were a misfiled document, costing him interest by the hour. That night the storm returned, meaner, banging a loose gutter somewhere beyond the ICU curtain. Richard's eyes found mine again. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked, voice thin as thread. I could have said what nurses say when men like him look at the ceiling and look for God in the holes of it. I could have said, "Rest now." Instead, I answered like a woman who has carried secrets for most of her life and has learned how to hold them without letting them rot. "Yes," I said. "I do." "Then I need yours," he whispered. We did not speak for a while after that. The monitors kept their steady gossip. The IV pump chirped its metronome. Somewhere down the hall a cart rolled, a soft rattle that always reminded me of a child's toy, the kind you push when you're learning to walk. At 11:42 p.m., the door opened without a knock. Daniel came back with the storm on his shoulders, the lawyer in his shadow, and the red folder in his hand. "Sign the 4 pages by midnight," he said again, voice clipped, "or I'll have security clear this room and she won't see you again." Richard didn't flinch. Men who have built towers learn early how not to blink. He looked at me, not at the sun, not at the folder, at me, as if my face could hold the room level. Outside, the wind shouldered the window so hard the glass gave a tired groan. I thought of my late husband, gone 14 winters now, and the way he used to say, "A house isn't a home until it's survived a storm." Richard's hand lifted, trembled, and then slow as tide reached toward mine. "Stay," he breathed. And I did. I stayed between a man and the kind of pressure that looks like love from a distance and inheritance up close. I stayed even as Daniel's mouth tightened into the shape of certain men's threats. I stayed while the clock guttered toward midnight and the storm kept counting for us, one thunder at a time. You might think I had a choice. You might ask why a nurse would stand her ground against money with nothing but a pulse and a promise to hold. But there are nights when a life pivots on the weight of a hand still warm in yours. When I first started working at Street Gabriel, I used to believe hospitals were built for healing. I was younger then, foolishly hopeful, the kind of nurse who still thought compassion could fix everything a scalpel couldn't. But years teach you that hospitals are just mirrors, clean, bright, and merciless. They reflect who you really are when there's no more pretending left. Richard Beaumont had been at the hospital for 3 weeks before the first headline about him appeared: "Oil magnate and philanthropist hospitalized in critical condition." The staff whispered like they always do when a famous name ends up under a white sheet instead of a magazine cover. Some said he was dying from stress. Others said karma had finally remembered his address. To me, he was just another patient, another fragile, sweating body, fighting the weight of its own past. His suite was larger than my first apartment. A glass wall looked out over the Boston skyline, where cranes and lights stood like sentinels. Each night, I wiped down the counters, adjusted the monitors, and sat by the window for a few quiet minutes before rounds. You learn to listen to buildings when you work night shifts. The hum of the oxygen tanks, the whisper of air conditioning, the sigh of the city below. Richard hardly spoke those first days. He would wake up to drink water, drift off, wake again to the sound of rain against the glass. The silence around him felt deliberate, almost disciplined, like a soldier refusing to flinch. Then one night, I asked a question I shouldn't have. "Do you ever sleep?" His eyes opened slowly. "Not really." "Pain?" I asked. "No," he said. "Memories." I smiled faintly. "Those are the worst kind." He turned his head toward me, his voice thin but sharp. "Do you have many?" "Enough to know that time doesn't heal," I said. "It just makes you quieter." That night, he told me about his mother, the one person he said had believed in him before he became rich enough for strangers to pretend they did. He said she used to tell him, "Money builds walls, guilt builds windows." I didn't understand what he meant then, but later, I would. Over the next week, he began to trust me in small ways. A glance, a whisper, a confession slipped between morphine dreams. He told me he didn't like the doctors talking about him as if he wasn't there. He didn't like how his sons hovered, waiting for his signature more than his breath. "They're good boys," he said once, "just born into the wrong kind of comfort." But I could tell he didn't believe his own words. His eldest, Daniel, came almost every day. Always in tailored suits, always with something to sign. He had that corporate politeness that sounds like care until you listen harder. When he wasn't pressing his father for decisions, he was pretending to make small talk with me, asking about my career, my age, whether I had family. "Just one daughter," I said. "She's a teacher in Maine." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "So you understand what it's like then," he said. "Children taking care of their parents." I remember thinking how wrong that sentence was. He didn't mean care, he meant control. By the second week, Richard stopped eating properly. His appetite went where his strength had gone. I spent most of my nights watching him breathe, checking the monitors and fighting the cold that seeps into your bones when you realize someone's countdown has begun. Then one morning, as I was changing his IV, he said quietly, "You don't wear perfume." "No," I said. "Hospital rules." "Good," he replied. "It reminds me of liars." I looked up, startled. He continued, "When you've lived long enough, you learn the smell of false affection." He closed his eyes after that, but something in me stayed awake for a long time. Around the hospital, stories about him began to mutate like gossip always does. Someone said he was rewriting his will. Someone else claimed he'd donated half his assets to charity. One nurse even swore she saw a priest leaving his room at dawn. I didn't ask him about any of it. People tell you what they want you to know when they're ready. My job was to wait and to keep him alive long enough to talk. But the real change came on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet, gray Sunday that feels like the world forgot to turn the page. He asked me to close the blinds, then whispered, "I need you to write something down." He dictated slowly, pausing to breathe between each phrase. "If anything happens, tell them not to bury me next to my wife. She was kind, but she was not my home." I stared at him. "Mr. Beaumont." "Just Richard," he said. His eyes were dry, but his voice carried something heavier than tears. "Anna, there's a woman. From a long time ago. I broke something I never fixed." He stopped to catch his breath. The monitor beeped in rhythm with the truth coming out of him. "She had my child. I never went back." I froze. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because everyone else in my life wants what I have," he said. "You're the only one who still believes in what's right." I looked at the man before me, the billionaire, the father, the ghost of 1,000 boardrooms, and saw something raw, not power, not pity, just a man terrified that forgiveness might expire before morning. That was the moment the seed of tragedy took root, the moment I realized I was no longer just his nurse. I was the witness to a truth that could break his entire family. And I had no idea that this secret would soon pull me into a storm I would never escape. The morning after his confession, the hospital seemed quieter than usual. Or maybe it was just me listening harder, expecting something to snap. There's a certain stillness that comes before a family turns on itself, like the hush between lightning and thunder. When I arrived for my shift, Daniel Beaumont was already in his father's room, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice me at first, too busy whispering into the line, "If we don't finalize this week, the board will start asking questions." His tone wasn't that of a worried son, it was business. Richard lay half awake, eyes tracing the ceiling tiles. When he saw me, his lips moved slightly. "Morning, Anna." Daniel turned. "Morning, nurse. How's he doing?" "Stable," I said, checking the IV drip. "Vitals are better today." "That's good," Daniel said, glancing at his father. "Maybe now we can go over those documents." Richard's eyes flicked toward me, pleading, almost embarrassed. "Not now," he muttered. Daniel sighed. "Dad, it's just paperwork. You're the one who wanted to adjust your holdings. I'm trying to protect what you built." "Protect?" Richard said quietly. "Or own?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's unfair." "Is it?" Richard asked, voice rough. "You've been standing where I used to stand, but you never learned why I stood there in the first place." The silence after that felt like a wound spreading. I busied myself with adjusting the blanket, pretending not to listen, but every word landed heavy in the air. The son's eyes softened for a moment. Maybe guilt, maybe strategy. "You need rest," he said finally. "I'll come back later." When he left, Richard's hand trembled slightly on the sheet. "He doesn't hear me anymore," he said. "He hears the inheritance." I wanted to say something comforting, something human, but comfort isn't always kindness, and truth was already leaking through the cracks. That afternoon, I brought in his lunch a tray of chicken broth, crackers, and a cup of apple juice he would barely touch. He stared at the spoon as if it were a mirror. "When you stop being hungry," I said, "that's when you worry me." "I've eaten my whole life," he said, "and still I'm starving." I didn't ask what for. I already knew. Regret has its own appetite. Around 4 o'clock, the matron stopped by Mrs. Gordon, tall, stern, always wearing a perfume that tried to disguise the smell of disinfectant. "Anna," she said, "you're being requested personally for Mr. Beaumont's night watch again." I hesitated. "Every night?" "Yes, he insists." There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe envy. "You must have made quite an impression." I wanted to say it wasn't about impression, it was about decency, but explaining kindness to people who see the world in shifts and salaries never works, so I just nodded. Later, when the halls quieted, Richard asked me about my family. I told him the truth that my husband had died 14 years ago, that my daughter Emily lived too far away to visit much, and that sometimes the silence in my apartment felt like it could swallow me whole. "You work all night to keep strangers breathing," he said softly. "And who keeps you breathing, Anna?" I smiled faintly. "Coffee, mostly." He laughed once, the sound rough but real. It was the first time I'd heard it. Then his expression changed. "My sons used to make me laugh that way," he said, "before money taught them how to speak in numbers." He stared at the rain streaking down the window. "Do you believe people can love you for who you are after they've already loved what you have?" "I think love proves itself when everything else disappears," I said. He turned toward me. "Then maybe I've never been loved." The words hung there, fragile as glass. I thought about all the nights I'd seen families fall apart in waiting rooms. The sons arguing over funeral costs. The daughters asking about wills before the heart monitor even flatlined. It's never death that destroys a family, it's what they believe they deserve after it. By the end of the shift, his breathing had softened. I checked the monitors one last time, dimmed the lights, and wrote my notes. Just as I turned to leave, he said my name again. "Anna." "Yes?" "Promise me something." "What is it?" "When the time comes, and it will, don't let them decide who I was." I didn't answer right away. In this place, we all end up defined by charts and signatures, not souls. "I'll try," I said, "but that's not a nurse's job." "Then tonight," he whispered. "It is." Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the kind that leaves everything damp but still. When I stepped into the hallway, Daniel was standing by the nurse's station, talking to Mrs. Gordon. His eyes followed me as I walked past, polite but cold. He smiled, thin and deliberate. "My father trusts you a lot, doesn't he?" I stopped. "He trusts anyone who treats him like a person, not a patient." He leaned in slightly. "Be careful, Anna. You wouldn't want anyone to misunderstand your closeness." I met his gaze. "I stopped worrying about misunderstandings when I started saving lives, Mr. Beaumont." He smirked. "Just remember you work for the hospital, not for him." He walked away, leaving the scent of cologne and threat behind him. That was the first fracture, the moment I realized this wasn't just a sick man's secret anymore. It was a family with too much to lose. And I, somehow, was standing in the middle of it. By the next week, everything inside the hospital felt slightly off, like the rhythm of the place had changed key, and no one wanted to admit it. Nurses whispered when I passed. The matron started keeping longer glances at my shift logs. And Daniel Beaumont, he began showing up at the strangest hours, always dressed too perfectly for the ICU. He never asked directly about his father's condition anymore. Instead, his questions circled around me. "How long have you worked here, Anna?" 28 years. "Do you always get this attached to your patients?" I smiled politely. "Only to the ones still breathing." He didn't laugh. He never did. But that night, something else happened. Something that left a thin crack in the quiet routine. At 2:10 a.m., I went in to check Richard's vitals. The monitors were stable. His breathing was slow, steady, a little shallower than before. I adjusted the blanket, turned off the lamp, and was about to leave when his voice broke the darkness. "They were here, weren't they?" I turned. His eyes were open, glinting faintly in the dim light. "Who was here?" I asked. "My sons. Daniel and the other one, Michael." "Not tonight," I said. "Just you and me." He exhaled shakily. I could smell them. The cologne. It lingers after ambition leaves the room. I smiled sadly. "You should rest." He looked past me toward the ceiling. "You ever keep a secret so long it starts to rot inside you?" I didn't answer. I'd kept one too, the one about my husband's affair before he died. Secrets rot, but they also hollow a space for mercy. Richard's gaze met mine. "They'll try to get you to talk, Anna. To sign something, to say something. Don't." "I won't," I said softly. "I mean it." His voice cracked. "If they ask, you know nothing." "I know how to stay silent," I said. "It's half my job." He gave a faint smile. "That's why I trust you." The next morning, the hospital's air smelled sharper, colder. When I went to get coffee, I overheard two nurses whispering near the supply cabinet. "She's in the room again." "With him?" "Yes, every night. She's probably after the money." They didn't know I was standing there. Or maybe they did. Either way, I walked past them without a word. People like to invent drama when they can't handle someone else's decency. By afternoon, the rumors reached the matron. Mrs. Gordon called me into her office, her expression careful, almost apologetic. "Anna, you've been requested to step back from the Beaumont case. Just for a few days." "By who?" I asked. She hesitated. "His son." I folded my arms. "And what does the doctor say?" "The attending sees no medical issue, but the family has influence." I stood silent for a moment. The fluorescent light above her desk buzzed faintly, like a wasp trapped behind glass. "You know he asked for me personally," I said. "I do," she replied, "but sometimes the hospital must accommodate." There it was, the word that kills integrity. Accommodate. I nodded once and left the office without another word. That evening, I stopped by Richard's room anyway. The door was half closed, but I heard voices, Daniel's sharp and insistent, the doctor's soft and strained. "She's just a nurse, Dad. There are protocols. You don't get to choose favorites here." "I get to choose who I trust," Richard said. "That's all I have left." "You're being manipulated." "By kindness?" Richard asked, coughing. "God forbid someone care without a price tag." I stayed outside, listening, invisible behind the door. Daniel sighed. "You think everyone's after your money, but this woman, she's after something else. Attention, maybe pity." "I've known pity," Richard said. "It doesn't sound like her." The argument ended when the doctor intervened, trying to steer them back to vitals and medication schedules. I slipped away before they could see me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the staff lounge, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the rain smear the city lights. I thought about quitting, about how peace sometimes means walking away before you're dragged into someone else's storm, but something inside me, call it conscience, call it stubborn faith, wouldn't let me. The next day, I arrived before sunrise. The corridors were still, except for the soft hum of machines and the faint scent of bleach. When I entered Richard's room, he was awake. A folded piece of paper rested on his tray. "For you," he said. I opened it. It was a note, handwritten, shaky. "If they send you away, go to my office desk drawer. The red envelope, you'll understand." I looked at him, startled. "What is this?" "Insurance," he said. "For the truth." Before I could respond, the door opened. Daniel stood there, a folder under his arm. "Good morning," he said with forced cheer. "I see you're still here." "I'm just finishing up," I said, hiding the note in my pocket. He smiled. "Perfect, because I'll be arranging a replacement starting tonight." Richard coughed violently. "She stays," he rasped. "Dad." "She stays," he repeated, louder this time, his breath ragged. "You think power means ownership, but I still decide who touches my veins." Daniel's expression hardened. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when this all goes wrong." He turned and walked out, the click of his shoes like gunfire down the hall. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my uniform. My pulse was loud in my ears. I didn't know what the red envelope meant or why he thought I'd need it, but I knew one thing for sure: whatever was hidden there, it wasn't just money or property, it was truth. And truth, in families like his, is always the most dangerous thing to hold. That night, as I watched him drift into sleep, lightning flashed across the glass wall, briefly painting his face in white light. He looked peaceful, almost younger, but I knew it was the kind of peace that only comes before another storm. Because in that silence, something inside me whispered, "This isn't the end of the routine, it's the beginning of the unraveling." It was a Thursday, the kind of day that starts ordinary, steady, predictable. The ICU smelled of coffee and antiseptic, a blend that always reminded me of endurance. The morning light slid through the blinds in narrow golden lines, cutting across the room like quiet reminders that the world outside was still alive. Richard had been stable for almost a week. Too stable, some would say. The doctors were already whispering about transferring him to a private facility. The family was circling again, emails, phone calls, murmured meetings in the hallway. But to me, he looked different. His eyes had gained a strange kind of urgency, as if time itself had started counting faster for him. He asked me for a pen. "I need to write something," he said. I brought him a clipboard and paper. He wrote slowly, pausing to breathe, his hands trembling so much that the ink stuttered across the page. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and slipped it into an envelope, the same red one he had mentioned in the note. "Lock it in the drawer by the window," he said. "Not with the others." I nodded. "Do you want me to tell someone about it?" "Not yet," he said. "When the time comes, you'll know." I'd heard enough deathbed promises to recognize when a man had already decided how his story would end. But this one felt different, like something unfinished was finally demanding to be seen. By noon, the hospital turned restless. A new patient had been brought in, a senator's wife, half the staff scrambling to accommodate her. The VIP floor was chaos, the kind that always follows power when it's frightened. That's when Daniel appeared again. He walked straight past the nurse's station, not bothering to greet anyone. He went into his father's room without knocking. I followed quietly after a moment, instinct guiding me. Inside, Daniel was standing at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, voice low but edged with frustration. "You're being irresponsible, Dad. Signing papers without legal counsel? Trusting people who barely know you?" Richard looked exhausted. "I've been trusting people who claim to love me for decades, Daniel. Look where that got me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think that nurse cares about you? She's doing her job. Don't confuse duty with devotion." He didn't notice I was standing just outside the doorway. But Richard did. His eyes found me, steady and deliberate. "Duty doesn't sit through the night without sleep," he said. "Duty doesn't hold your hand when you forget how to breathe." Daniel turned sharply. "She's listening." "I want her to," Richard said. "At least she hears me." Daniel took a step closer to the bed. "If you want to throw this family's name into chaos because of your misplaced sentiment, go ahead. But when the world finds out about your secret," he sneered the word, "don't expect me to fix it." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand yet. You will." Daniel left with the kind of silence that costs more than shouting. I waited until the footsteps faded, then walked inside. Richard's breathing was uneven, his fingers gripping the blanket. "He knows," I said quietly. "Not enough," he murmured, "but soon he will." The rest of the day crawled by. Visitors came and went. Doctors murmured updates. I took vitals, cleaned lines, and kept my eyes on the drawer with the red envelope. Every time someone entered the room, my heart gave a small, unreasonable thump. Then, just before midnight, the alarms began. It started as a single beeping, an irregular rhythm, one I recognized too well. I ran to his bedside. His blood pressure had dropped. The monitor screamed its warning, and the intercom crackled with the sound of running feet. Code blue, room 7 amperes. For the next 9 minutes, the room was nothing but movement and noise, a doctor shouting orders, the crash cart wheels screeching, the smell of adrenaline and antiseptic mixing in the air. I pressed on his chest, counted compressions, prayed under my breath even though I hadn't done that in years. "Clear!" the doctor shouted. The defibrillator fired. His body lifted, then fell back against the bed. Once. Twice. Then the line steadied. The doctor looked at the monitor, nodded. "We got him." Everyone exhaled. But I didn't. Because when I leaned close, Richard's eyes were open, and he was looking straight at me. His lips moved, faintly. No sound came out. I bent closer, my ear almost to his mouth. "Find her," he whispered. "Promise me, Anna, find her." "Who?" I asked, but his eyes were already closing. He was alive, but barely. The team stabilized him, set up new IVs, adjusted the oxygen flow. Then they left, one by one, like the tide retreating after a storm. I stayed behind, my uniform soaked with sweat and tears. When the hallway was empty, I opened the drawer. The red envelope was gone. My pulse thudded in my ears. I checked the bedside table, the waste bin, even the floor. Nothing. It had vanished. The door creaked open. Daniel stood there, tie loosened, eyes cold. "Rough night?" he asked. I straightened. "You were here." "Of course," he said. "I was worried." He smiled faintly, and for the first time, I realized what real danger looked like. It wasn't guns or knives. It was a man with too much money, too much time, and a reason to hide the truth. When I looked back at Richard, he was unconscious again, his hand limp in mine. The monitors hummed softly, steady, oblivious. Somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. I wasn't just his nurse anymore. I was now holding a promise that could destroy an empire. And I had no idea who might come for me next. The next morning began too quietly for what had happened the night before. Hospitals have a way of pretending nothing ever occurs within their walls, that no one nearly dies, no one cries in stairwells, and no one steals something that could change everything. But I knew better. The red envelope was gone. And with it, the last piece of proof that Richard Beaumont had trusted me with something bigger than medicine. When I walked into the ICU, the blinds were half drawn. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, the kind that lingers after too many sleepless nights. Richard was awake, barely. His face was pale, his lips cracked, but his eyes, those restless eyes, searched the room as soon as I entered. "Anna," he whispered. I leaned close. "I'm here." "The envelope," his breath caught. "It's gone." I nodded. "I know." He turned his head slowly, wincing. He took it. "Daniel?" Richard didn't answer, but his silence told me enough. He gripped my wrist, his fingers cold and desperate. "Listen to me," he said, forcing air through his dry throat. "They'll tell you things make you doubt what you saw. Don't let them. Promise me." "I promise." He relaxed slightly, closing his eyes. "Good, because if they destroy that letter, the truth dies with me." I wanted to ask what truth he meant, but just then, the door opened. Daniel walked in, his voice polished and calm, carrying a tray of coffee cups like a man who had rehearsed concern. "Morning, Anna. How's our patient today?" "Our patient?" I repeated. He smiled, pretending not to notice my tone. "You've been through quite a night. Thought I'd bring you something warm." I looked at the coffee and didn't move. "You were here last night, weren't you?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" "During the code. You came in after the crash team left." Daniel's smile froze for half a second, then returned. "I was worried about my father. Isn't that what sons do?" "Depends," I said quietly. "Some visit for love, some for signatures." The silence between us thickened. Richard stirred weakly. "Leave us," he murmured. Daniel hesitated, then leaned close to his father. "You need rest. I'll come back later." He turned to me before leaving. "Do make sure he stays calm, Anna. Stress isn't good for recovery or for anyone's career." When he was gone, Richard exhaled a shuddering breath. "He's not giving up." "What was in that envelope?" I asked. He looked at me with something between fear and resignation. "Proof. Of what I did. Of who she was." "Her?" "The woman I told you about," he said softly. "The one I left behind." For a long moment I didn't speak. The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to confessions. "Richard," I said, "why me? Why trust a stranger with something like this?" He smiled faintly. "You think strangers can't save us? Nurses are the last honest witnesses in this world. Everyone else comes with a motive." I didn't know what to say, so I just adjusted his blanket, as if neat corners could hold together a life unraveling by the hour. By evening, the whispers had started again. Nurses asking why the matrons suddenly requested copies of all ICU security footage. Orderlies saying someone had filed a formal complaint about inappropriate emotional involvement. It didn't take a genius to know who had started it. When my shift ended, I was called into Mrs. Gordon's office. She didn't look up from her papers when I entered. "Sit," she said. I Saturday. "You've been placed under review," she said evenly. "There are concerns regarding your professional boundaries with Mr. Beaumont." I let out a slow breath. "Concerns by whom?" She glanced up, eyes cool. "The family, particularly his eldest son." "Of course," I muttered. She folded her hands. "Anna, I know your reputation. 28 years, not a single complaint. But these are powerful people. If this escalates, it could complicate things." "Complicate?" I said sharply. "I saved his life last night." "I'm not questioning your competence," she said. "But perception matters. The hospital doesn't want bad press." Bad press. That's what truth becomes when it doesn't fit someone's agenda. I stood. "So what do you want me to do?" "Take 2 days off. Let things cool down." I clenched my jaw. "And if he asks for me?" She hesitated. "He won't." But she was wrong. That night, my phone buzzed around midnight. The caller ID showed the hospital's private line. When I answered, the voice was faint but unmistakable. "Anna, it's me." "Richard?" "They're watching my room," he whispered. but I need you to come tomorrow morning early, before shift change. Why? There's something left they don't know about. I hid it. Where? He coughed hard, the sound tearing through the receiver. Behind the portrait, in my office at home. Bring it to me before they get there. Richard, I can't just. Please, he said. It's the only way she'll ever be found. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, the hum of the dial tone filling my apartment. The street outside was silent except for the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement. For the first time in years, I felt fear, not the kind that comes from losing a patient, but the kind that comes from realizing you're stepping into a story that might ruin you. Still, I knew I'd go. Because once you hold a dying man's promise, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. The next morning, before the sun had burned through the mist, I took the hospital badge from my uniform, tucked it into my pocket, and started the car. The address I had written weeks ago, on a coffee napkin, Beaumont Estate, 41 Westfield Drive, waited on the passenger seat like a secret daring me to open it. I didn't know it yet, but that drive would be the point of no return. The Beaumont Estate sat on the edge of the Charles River, a monument of white stone and glass that caught the morning light like a blade. Everything about it felt too polished, too controlled, like a place that didn't believe in mistakes. Even the air smelled expensive, fresh-cut grass, chlorine from the infinity pool, and faint cigar smoke clinging to the breeze. I parked a few houses down, heart pounding in my throat. The sun was still low, slicing through a thin fog that made the mansion shimmer like something unreal. I had promised myself I wouldn't cross the line between duty and danger, but I was already too far in to turn back. Richard's voice echoed in my head. Behind the portrait. In my office. The front gate was open, as if expecting someone. I walked up the stone driveway, trying to look like I belonged there. Nurses learned to move quietly, to be invisible even when seen. Inside, the foyer was a museum of wealth. Marble floors, silver-framed portraits, an enormous chandelier that hung like frozen lightning. Every surface reflected a life built to impress. But the house was silent, the kind of silence that means something is about to happen. I found the office easily. It smelled of leather, old books, and power. Heavy curtains filtered the light, dust motes floating in lazy spirals. The portrait above the fireplace showed Richard in his younger years, firm jaw, confident smile, the kind of man who believed the world bent to his will. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the frame. It was heavier than I expected. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a thin black envelope. Not red this time, black. I slipped it into my bag, just as footsteps echoed from the hallway. "Who's there?" a voice demanded. "Daniel." I turned, forcing calm into my voice. "It's Anna. Your father asked me to pick up a few personal items for the hospital." He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the sunlight behind him. "At 6 in the morning?" "He didn't want anyone else to know," I said. He took a slow step inside. "That's the thing about secrets, Anna. They don't stay quiet for long, especially when money's involved. I'm not here for his money." "Of course you're not." His tone was velvet, but the edge underneath it could cut glass. "My father has a way of making people believe they're special. Don't take it personally. It's just one of his games." "He's not playing," I said. "He's dying." Daniel studied me, head tilted, like he was trying to decide whether to pity me or destroy me. "If you have something," he said slowly, "give it to me. I'll make sure it's handled properly." "Handle it?" He smiled thinly. "Disposed of." The air between us thickened. "I'm a nurse, not a courier," I said. "If he trusted me, it's because he knows what trust means." Daniel's expression shifted just for a moment. Something bitter flashed across his face, then vanished. "You really think you're saving him?" he asked. "You're just helping him rewrite a story that should have stayed buried." He stepped closer. "If you were smart, you'd stay out of this. I've spent 30 years watching men like you call cruelty smart. I'll take my chances." His jaw tightened. "Get out." I walked past him without another word, my pulse roaring in my ears. As I reached the door, he said quietly, "You'll regret this, Anna." Maybe I would. But not as much as I would have regretted walking away. The moment I stepped outside, the wind hit me sharp, cold, and full of warning. I drove straight back to the hospital, hands gripping the wheel like I could steer fate itself. When I arrived, The ICU was already in motion, nurses rushing, monitors beeping faster than they should. The look on Mrs. Gordon's face told me before her words did. "Anna," she said, "he's crashing again." I ran. Richard was pale, his chest rising shallowly, his eyes open but distant. The machines screamed their mechanical panic. The doctor shouted orders, but his voice sounded far away. I leaned over him, gripping his hand. "Richard, it's Anna. I'm here." His lips moved faintly. "Did you find it?" I nodded. "Yes." His eyes flickered relief, maybe faith. "Don't let them take it." Then his body jerked, monitors spiking. The crash team flooded in again, voices overlapping, paddles pressing against his chest. I was pushed back, powerless, watching a life fight for one more chance to finish its sentence. After 12 minutes, they stabilized him barely. He was sedated, tubes and lines everywhere, the kind of fragile stillness that sits right next to death. When the others left, I sat beside him, fingers trembling. The black envelope was still in my bag. I wanted to open it right there, to see what truth could possibly justify all this chaos. But something inside me whispered to wait. Instead, I reached out and brushed a strand of gray hair from his forehead. "You're not alone," I said softly. "Not anymore." That was when I felt it eyes on me. I turned toward the glass window of the ICU. Daniel was standing there, watching through the reflection. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just stared, long enough for me to understand exactly what he meant. This isn't over, and he was right. Because the storm hadn't ended when I left his house. It had only followed me back here. 3 days later, the hospital arranged a family meeting. That's what they called it, but everyone knew what it really was, a performance. A carefully choreographed scene to show the world that the Beaumonts were still united, still powerful, still in control. The conference room smelled of coffee, fresh print toner, and nerves. A mahogany table stretched across the room like a battlefield. On one end sat Mrs. Gordon, pretending to moderate. On the other, the Beaumont family, Daniel, his younger brother Michael, their mother Evelyn in her pearls and black suit, and a lawyer whose smile could have been printed on the firm's letterhead. I shouldn't have been there. Nurses rarely are. But Richard had requested me personally, and he wasn't well enough to attend. His voice on the phone the night before had been faint, trembling. "If I can't be there, you will be. You'll tell them what matters." When I entered the room, conversations stalled. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Evelyn's lips pressed into a polite, practiced curve. "Miss Miller," she said, "how unexpected." "I'm here on Mr. Beaumont's behalf," I said. "He asked me to deliver a few instructions regarding his care." "Care?" Daniel repeated. "That's what we're calling it now?" Mrs. Gordon cleared her throat. "Let's all stay professional, please." The lawyer opened his folder. "Mr. Beaumont's condition has stabilized for now. However, as per the family's concern, we're here to discuss next steps, medical, legal, and financial. He has expressed interest in updating certain personal documents, but there are complications." "Complications," Daniel said, glancing at me. "Yes, there usually are when strangers get involved in family matters." I met his gaze evenly. If doing my job makes me a stranger, then yes, there are complications. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Daniel, maybe we should just hear what she has to say." His brother shot him a warning look. "Stay out of this." Evelyn turned her attention to me, her voice as smooth as a courtroom. "My husband is an emotional man. He's easily influenced when he's unwell. I'm sure you understand how fragile patients can be in such states." I took a slow breath. "He's sick, not senile." The room went still. Mrs. Gordon shifted in her chair, caught between rules and reverence for the Beaumont name. Daniel leaned forward. "You seem awfully confident for someone who was nearly suspended last week." "That's because I'm telling the truth," I said, "and the truth doesn't need permission." He smirked. "Everyone needs permission in this family." I opened my bag, the black envelope burning in my mind, though I didn't pull it out. Instead, I unfolded a note Richard had written that morning short, handwritten, shaky. "Do not sign anything without me. What is hidden will soon come to light." I placed it gently on the table. He asked me to read this aloud. Evelyn's fingers stiffened around her coffee cup. Daniel's expression darkened. Michael looked down, ashamed. Mrs. Gordon cleared her throat again. Let the record note that the statement has been read as part of Mr. Beaumont's expressed wishes. Daniel snatched the note, scanning it. This is nonsense, he snapped. He's delirious. Delirious men don't remember where they hide things, I said quietly. He froze, eyes flicking to me. What did you just say? I said he's not delirious. But we both knew what I'd really said. His reaction told me he knew about the office, about the missing envelope, about what I had found. The lawyer stood up quickly, trying to redirect. Perhaps we should end the meeting. It seems emotions are running high. Daniel pushed back his chair and stood. Yes, I think that's wise. He turned to me, voice low but audible enough for everyone to hear. Stay out of this, Nurse Miller. My father's money doesn't need another savior. He walked out, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn followed, her heels clicking like clock hands counting down something inevitable. When the room emptied, Mrs. Gordon sighed, pressing her palms to her temples. Anna, she said softly, I hope you know what you're doing. I'm not sure I do, I admitted, but I know why I'm doing it. Later that afternoon, I went to check on Richard. He was sleeping, breathing shallowly, his hands folded on his chest like a man halfway between life and goodbye. I sat beside him, listening to the slow rhythm of the heart monitor. When he opened his eyes, his voice was barely a whisper. They met, didn't they? Yes. He looked at the ceiling, a faint smile touching his lips, and they argued. They did. Good, he murmured. Let them argue. That's how guilt sounds when it's trying to hide. I hesitated, then asked, What's in that envelope, Richard? What are they so afraid of? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the sky had turned pale with evening light. It's not what they think, he said finally. It's who. He turned his head, eyes locking on mine. There's a woman and a child. They were my real family, long before all this glass and money. My throat tightened. Where are they now? I don't know, he said softly, but I think you're meant to find them. A silence hung between us, thick as confession. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, faint but approaching. It always did. I reached for his hand, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't resist. He looked at me not as a nurse, not as a witness, but as the only person left who might believe him. And that was the moment I realized the truth was no longer just his secret. It was mine, too. The storm finally arrived the next night, not in the sky, but inside the hospital. I had seen many kinds of tempests in my 30 years of nursing grief, rage, desperation, but this one was different. This one wore perfume, designer suits, and polished shoes. This one came with press cameras. By the time I arrived for the night shift, the lobby was swarming with reporters. Flashing lights reflected off the marble floors, microphones pointed like weapons toward the elevators. The headline spreading online was viciously fast. Beaumont Empire faces secret scandal amid billionaire's hospitalization. The rumors had broken wide open. Someone had leaked something, maybe the meeting, maybe the whisper about the hidden letters, maybe just enough truth twisted into poison. Whatever it was, the story had caught fire. When I reached the ICU, the air was heavier than usual. 2 security guards stood outside Richard's room. The door was shut tight. Inside, Daniel's voice thundered like the storm outside. Do you understand what you've done? He barked. Do you have any idea what the media is saying right now? I hesitated at the doorway. Through the glass, I could see him leaning over his father's bed, red-faced, furious. Richard looked smaller than ever, half buried under tubes and sheets, but his expression didn't waver. They can say whatever they want, Richard said weakly. It doesn't change what's true. Daniel slammed his hand against the table. What truth? That you've been manipulated by a nurse who thinks she's your savior? My pulse tightened. I stepped inside before I could stop myself. Enough. Daniel turned sharply. You don't get to tell me what's enough. I do when you're shouting at a patient. This isn't your concern. It became my concern, I said. The moment your father stopped trusting his own blood and had to rely on a stranger to protect him. The words hit harder than I intended. Even Richard's eyes widened slightly. Daniel's voice lowered to a dangerous calm. Do you know what happens when people like you overstep? I've seen what happens when people like you never do. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then he laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Fine. You want to play hero? Let's see how that feels when you're unemployed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. You're finished, Anna. The board will have your license by morning." Before I could answer, he turned to the guards. "Keep her out of this room unless I say otherwise." He left, slamming the door so hard the glass vibrated. Richard's eyes followed him out, weary but steady. "He's just scared," he murmured. "Fear makes people cruel." I swallowed hard, forcing down the anger. "He's not scared, Richard. He's cornered." I sat down beside him. "Tell me what's in those letters, please. If I'm going to fight for you, I need to know what I'm protecting." He hesitated, his chest rising and falling with effort. Finally, he whispered, "Her name was Maria." I frowned. "Maria? She was everything my world said I couldn't have. The only one who ever saw me before the money did." He paused, his voice trembling. "We had a child, Anna. A daughter." I froze. "She was the only good thing I ever made," he said. "But I left them. My family made sure of it. The letters proof of what happened. The birth certificate, photos, everything. I kept them all. I thought I could fix it before I died." "Does Daniel know?" I asked. "He suspects. That's why he's fighting so hard to destroy it." My throat went dry. "And the woman? The daughter?" "I don't know where they are," he whispered. "That's why I need you. You'll find them." Before I could respond, the door burst open again. Mrs. Gordon entered, flanked by 2 administrators. "Anna," she said tightly. "I'm sorry. You need to come with us." I stood, confused. "What's this about?" "An internal review. Effective immediately. You're being placed on administrative leave." Daniel appeared behind her, arms crossed, smug and silent. Richard tried to sit up. "No," he said, voice cracking. "She stays." "I'm afraid it's already decided," Mrs. Gordon said. "This comes from the family and the board." I turned to Daniel. "You did this." He smiled faintly. "Actions have consequences." The humiliation burned through me. The guards watched as I gathered my things, my badge, my notepad, my stethoscope. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. When I reached Richard's bedside, he caught my hand. His grip was weak but desperate. "Don't stop," he whispered. "Promise me you'll keep going." I nodded. "I will." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Drama until the end." I looked at him and said quietly, "You can take away my job, but not the truth." Then I walked out. The hallway was long, blindingly white. Nurses looked up as I passed, some with pity, some with curiosity. None dared to speak. Outside, the rain had started again, hard and relentless, soaking through my coat before I reached the car. For the first time in years, I didn't drive home. I didn't even know where home was anymore. I just kept driving, past the city lights, through the blur of storm and headlights, until the world felt empty enough for my thoughts to echo. That night, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, replaying every word Richard had said. Maria, daughter, proof, find them. And somewhere in the silence, I realized something simple and terrifying. If Daniel had risked everything to silence me, then the truth inside that black envelope had to be worth more than all the money in the Beaumont fortune. And that meant only one thing. I couldn't stop now. I spent that night sitting in my car, the city breathing around me, sirens, wet tires, the faint hum of streetlights. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the kind that lingers after a storm, unwilling to let go. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The black envelope sat in the passenger seat, its edges soft from my fingerprints. I had promised Richard I would wait, but promises made to dying men don't belong to time, they belong to truth, and truth was burning a hole through that paper. When I finally opened it, my hands trembled. Inside were several folded documents, yellowed from age, each one bearing the Beaumont seal at the top. Beneath them, a small photograph slipped out and landed on my lap. It was a woman, dark hair, soft eyes, standing in front of a modest house with a baby in her arms. On the back, in Richard's handwriting, were 4 words, Maria and our daughter. I stared at it for a long time. My chest tightened with a feeling I hadn't known in years, something between awe and dread. The first document was a letter, dated nearly 30 years earlier. To whom it may concern. The bearer of this letter, Maria Lawson, is under my protection. She is to remain in residence at the Beaumont Lake House until further notice. No family member or associate is to interfere with her living arrangements. She carries my child. Richard Beaumont, 1995. My throat closed. The next page was a notarized record of property transfer. The lake house quietly bought in her name. Then came another letter. This one was never mailed. It was written in Richard's hand but unsigned. Maria, I thought time would make it easier. It didn't. Every night I hear our daughters cry in my head. I built an empire on silence, but it's you who haunts the empty rooms. Forgive me. If anything happens to me, I want the world to know you existed not as a mistake, but as the only thing I ever got right. My eyes blurred. I had read thousands of medical charts, death certificates, incident reports. But this was something else entirely, a confession. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell struck 4 times. Dawn was coming, and with it, a choice I could no longer avoid. If I stayed silent, Daniel would win. The Beaumont name would stay clean. The truth would rot beneath silk sheets and marble floors. But if I spoke, if I took this to the world, I would lose everything. My job, my reputation, maybe even my safety. I looked again at the photograph. The baby's face was blurry, but there was something familiar about the curve of her mouth. I thought of Richard's last words, "Find her." I didn't know where to begin. All I had was a name and an old address, Beaumont Lake House, Cedar Falls. I started the car. The drive took 3 hours, through stretches of gray highway and misty forest roads. When I finally reached Cedar Falls, it was barely morning. The town was small, quiet, the kind of place where gossip travels faster than the mail. The lake house sat at the end of a dirt road, hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusted gate. The paint had peeled from its white boards, the porch sagging slightly. It was beautiful once, I could tell. When I pushed open the door, the smell hit me: first dust, damp wood, and something faintly floral, like a memory that refused to fade. Inside, the furniture was still covered with sheets. A rocking chair stood near the window. On the mantel, a single picture frame faced the lake. I brushed off the dust and saw the same woman, Maria, smiling gently, the baby now a toddler beside her. I searched the house slowly, careful not to disturb too much. Upstairs, in what must have been her bedroom, I found a drawer full of letters tied with a ribbon. Each one was addressed to Richard Beaumont. None had ever been sent. I untied the ribbon and read the first. "You said you'd come back. Every day I waited by the road until the leaves fell and grew again. Our daughter asks where you are. I tell her you're building us a life. Maybe that's still true." Another read, "They came today, your family's men. They offered money. I told them I don't want anything except truth. They laughed and said truth doesn't buy peace. Maybe they're right." By the 4th letter, I was crying. Quietly, angrily, helplessly. This wasn't just a secret affair, it was an erasure. A woman and child wiped out of existence because they didn't fit the narrative of wealth. I gathered the letters carefully, placing them back in the envelope. Then I noticed something wedged at the back of the drawer, a thin metal box. Inside it was a folded document, a birth certificate. Name, Lily Maria Lawson. Date of birth, the 18th of July, 1996. Father, Richard Beaumont. I pressed my hand to my mouth. She had a name. She had proof. And somewhere out there, she was still alive. I sat down on the edge of the bed, shaking. Outside, the sun was rising, spilling gold over the lake like forgiveness that came too late. I didn't know how, but I would find her. Because now, this wasn't about a dying man's redemption, it was about a daughter's right to know she existed. And Daniel Beaumont would do anything to make sure that never happened. By the time I left the lake house, the morning mist had burned away, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost sacred. I carried the black envelope pressed against my chest, the letters and the birth certificate inside. The weight of them wasn't much, maybe a few ounces, but to me, it felt heavier than truth itself. I sat in my car, staring out at the still surface of the lake. Somewhere in that reflection, 30 years of silence floated beneath the water. A man's guilt, a woman's heartbreak, and a child who'd grown up without knowing why she was invisible. Lily Maria Lawson. I whispered the name aloud, half expecting the wind to answer me. When I finally started the car, I had only one goal: to find her. But I didn't know where to begin. The address on the birth certificate was ancient, a post office box long expired. The town records were minimal. I drove into the center of Cedar Falls, a quiet stretch of Main Street lined with faded shop fronts, and a small diner whose windows glowed with the kind of warmth only small towns seem to remember. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The waitress, gray hair, soft eyes, name tag that read Hazel, looked up from behind the counter. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," I said, sliding into a booth. When she brought it over, I decided to risk it. "Do you remember a woman named Maria Lawson, lived near the lake house years ago?" Hazel's smile faded a little. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Maria, yes, I do. Sweet girl. Used to come here with her little one. Always paid in cash. Tipped too much. Why do you ask?" "I'm trying to find her daughter," I said. "Lily." Hazel's eyes softened, but there was something cautious behind them. "You're a bit late for that. Maria passed away some years ago, heart failure, I think. Poor thing. But Lily, she left town after the funeral, said she was going to Boston for nursing school." My chest tightened. "Nursing?" "Yeah. She said she wanted to help people like her mama." Hazel smiled faintly. "If she stayed true to her word, she might still be around the city somewhere. Bright girl, kind, but she didn't use her father's name, whatever that was. She went by Lily Lawson." I thanked Hazel, left a tip, and walked out into the sunlight with my heart racing. A nurse in Boston. Maybe, without even knowing it, she'd followed the same path her father once admired in others, the kind that required clean hands and a clean heart. When I got back into the car, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Anna Miller?" The voice was low, careful, a woman's voice. "Yes," I said. "This is Lily Lawson. I think you've been looking for me." For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. How did you find me?" There was a pause. "You called the diner, didn't you?" Hazel told me. "She called me right after you left, said someone came asking about my mother." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the edge beneath it, the kind that comes from years of building walls just to keep breathing. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. Your mother, she was someone important to a man I know. Richard Beaumont," she interrupted quietly. The world tilted. "You know?" "I know the name," she said. "My mother told me before she died. She said he was my father. She said he loved me once, before the world got in the way. But I didn't believe her." "Why not?" "Because men like him don't lose things," she said. "They throw them away." I swallowed hard. "He's dying, Lily. And he's been trying to find you. He kept everything, letters, photos, your birth certificate. I have them with me." Another long pause. Then, quietly, "You have proof?" "Yes. I don't need his proof," she said. "I have her memory." The way she said her made my eyes sting. "Still," I said softly, "he wants to see you. Not for forgiveness. He doesn't even ask for that. Just to look at you once before it's too late." She exhaled slowly, and I could almost picture her standing somewhere in the city, maybe in scrubs, maybe still holding on to the kind of exhaustion nurses share like a secret language. "He's at Street Gabriel Hospital?" she asked finally. "Yes, ICU floor." Silence again, and then, "I'll come tomorrow, but not for him, for me." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand. Outside, the world moved gently, birds over the water, a single truck rolling past on the road, but inside me, everything was shifting. That night I drove back to Boston. I couldn't tell anyone, not Mrs. Gordon, not Daniel, not even Richard. I didn't want to risk her changing her mind. When I walked into the hospital the next morning, Richard was awake. His eyes found me the moment I entered, and he smiled faintly. "You found her," he whispered. I froze. "How did you—" "I knew you would," he said. "Some people bring peace wherever they go. You're one of them." I took his hand. "She's coming, Richard." Tears filled his eyes. "Then maybe I can finally rest." Outside the room, Daniel was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he narrowed his eyes. "You're not supposed to be here." "I'm not here for you." "You don't quit, do you?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not when truth is still breathing." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" But I didn't answer, because somewhere, a young woman named Lily Lawson was already on her way to meet the man who'd given her his blood but never his name. and I had no idea that her arrival would change everything again. The following morning, the hospital corridors carried that strange hum that comes when something momentous is about to happen but no one knows it yet. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and shining, as if even the sky wanted to bear witness. I arrived at Street Gabriel before sunrise. Richard was already awake, sitting slightly upright with the help of pillows. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "She's coming, isn't she?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "She said she'd be here this morning." He exhaled slowly, his chest trembling. "After all these years," his voice cracked. "Does she know who I am?" "She knows," I said gently. "And she knows what you've done to find her." He closed his eyes. "That's not enough. I have to see her. I have to tell her myself." I took his hand. "You will." By 8 o'clock, the lobby doors opened. I saw her immediately because she looked like him and like the woman in the photograph all at once. Lily Lawson. She couldn't have been more than 28 or 29. Her brown hair was pulled back neatly, her scrubs pale blue, her ID badge clipped to her chest. She moved like someone who had learned to be careful with the world, as if it might break if she wasn't gentle enough. When her eyes met mine, I saw strength and beneath it, grief that never found a home. "Anna?" she asked. "Yes." She hesitated. "Is he really here?" "He's waiting for you," I said softly. Her throat bobbed. "I don't know what I'll say to him." "Say whatever truth you've carried all this time," I said. "That's all he deserves." We walked together down the corridor. Her steps slowed as we reached the ICU wing. The security guard at the door looked up, uncertain. I flashed my badge. "She's with me." When we entered, Richard's gaze lifted. For a second, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then his expression changed. Recognition, disbelief, awe. His lips trembled. "Maria," he whispered. Lily stopped. "That was my mother," she said quietly. "I'm her daughter." Tears filled his eyes. "Lily." Her name escaped his mouth like a prayer he'd been holding for 3 decades. He tried to reach for her, but the tubes tangled around his arm. I helped him lift it. She stood beside the bed, arms folded, her eyes wet but fierce. "You're dying," she said flatly. He nodded. "Yes." "Good," she said, though her voice shook. "Because for most of my life, you've been dead to me anyway." The words hit hard. I saw him flinch, but he didn't turn away. "I deserve that," he said. "I deserve worse." "You left her," Lily said. "You left us to fend for ourselves while you lived like royalty. She worked herself sick to raise me. She never stopped loving you, and you never came." "I tried," he said, his voice cracking. "They stopped me, my family, my father. They said if I went back, they'd ruin her. I was weak, Lily. I was a coward." She shook her head, tears spilling. "You had power, and you used it to disappear." He closed his eyes. "I thought time would fix it, but time doesn't heal what it doesn't touch." I stood silently at the corner of the room, my heart heavy. This was their moment, not mine. Then Richard looked up, his voice trembling. "Do you believe people can change?" Lily hesitated. "I believe they can regret." He smiled faintly, tears running down into his beard. "That's more mercy than I deserve." For a moment, the air felt still, just the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the sound of their breathing. Then Richard motioned toward me. "Anna, the papers." I opened the envelope and handed him the birth certificate, the photograph, and the letters Maria had written. His hands shook as he touched them. "Your mother was the best person I ever knew," he said. "And I ruined her, but I kept every piece of her I could. She deserved a world I was too afraid to give her." Lily's eyes softened despite herself. She reached for the photo and traced her mother's face with her finger. "She used to hum when she cooked," she said. "Always the same tune. I never knew why she looked so sad when she sang it." Richard smiled weakly. "It was the song she used to play on the porch the night we met." Silence fell again, thick and fragile. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said finally. "I just wanted to see your face, to tell you that you were wanted even when I didn't deserve to want you." Lily took a step closer, her voice trembling. "You don't get to make peace that easily." "I know," he said. "Peace isn't mine to claim, but I wanted you to have what's rightfully yours." "What do you mean?" He looked toward me. "The new will, It's in the red folder at my bedside. I froze. The red folder, the one Daniel had taken. Lily frowned. What will? Before I could speak, the door burst open. Daniel stood there, eyes dark, his tie undone, fury radiating off him. Behind him, 2 reporters held cameras. "There it is," one shouted. "The secret daughter." The room exploded into chaos. "Get them out!" I yelled, trying to block the cameras, but flashes burst across the room like lightning. Lily recoiled, covering her face. Richard tried to sit up, gasping. "No, not like this." Daniel's voice rose above the shouting. "You want to destroy this family, Father? You want to hand everything to a stranger?" "She's not a stranger," Richard coughed violently, blood spotting his lips. "She's my blood." The reporters kept snapping photos, shouting questions. "Is it true, Miss Lawson? Are you the hidden heir?" Lily's eyes filled with panic. "Turn those off." Security rushed in, dragging the reporters out. The door slammed shut, but the damage was already done. Richard collapsed against the bed, wheezing, clutching his chest. I ran to his side. "He needs oxygen." Daniel stood frozen, realization creeping into his expression. "I didn't get the doctor," I shouted, but it was too late. The monitors shrieked, a high, desperate sound. Richard's body convulsed once, then stilled. I pressed my fingers to his neck. Nothing. Lily stood motionless, tears streaming silently down her face. The room fell into a silence so deep it hurt. Daniel took a trembling step forward, his voice small. "Is he gone?" I looked at him, then at Lily. "Yes." She turned toward him, eyes full of a calm fury that chilled me. "You did this," she said quietly. "You turned his death into a headline." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. And as I covered Richard's body with a white sheet, I knew the storm wasn't over. It had only changed shape. 3 days after Richard Beaumont's death, Boston's sky turned the same shade of gray as the marble that lined his family estate. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its echo like grief that refuses to fade. The funeral was small but suffocatingly elegant. Rows of black umbrellas dotted the cemetery like punctuation marks on a sentence that ended too abruptly. Everyone spoke in whispers, but the silence said more. Lily stood beside me, dressed simply, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. She hadn't said much since that day in the ICU. The reporters had been forced away, but the headlines hadn't stopped. Beaumont heiress emerges after billionaire's death. Family in crisis. Hidden daughter claims the throne. Daniel handled it with cold precision. He hired PR firms, lawyers, and security, all to maintain control, but the more he tried to contain the story, the larger it grew. When the funeral ended, the family lawyer, a man named Charles Whitmore, announced that the official reading of the will would take place that evening, at the Beaumont estate. I wasn't supposed to be there. Nurses don't attend such things, but Lily refused to go without me. "He trusted you," she said, "and so do I." That's how I found myself standing again in the same house that had started it all, the glass mansion where secrets had slept under chandeliers. The room was filled with the scent of flowers, fresh polish, and tension. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid. Evelyn, his mother, wore black lace gloves and a look that could slice glass. Lily and I sat near the back. Charles cleared his throat and began. "This is the last will and testament of Richard J. Beaumont, signed and witnessed 2 weeks prior to his passing." The room stilled. "As executor, I am to distribute his estate according to his written and verified wishes. Mr. Beaumont made several significant amendments before his death." Daniel's jaw flexed. "Amendments?" Charles nodded. "Yes. The latest draft was delivered to my office by Nurse Anna Miller on Mr. Beaumont's written instruction." Evelyn's voice dripped with disdain. "Of course it was." Charles continued, his voice steady. "To my sons Daniel and Michael Beaumont, I leave my gratitude and the lessons of ambition, which I hope they will learn to wield with conscience." Daniel frowned. "That's not—" Charles held up a hand. "I'm not finished." He turned the page. "To my daughter Lily Maria Lawson, I leave 45% of my estate, including ownership of the Cedar Falls property and all associated holdings." The room erupted. Evelyn gasped. Michael muttered something under his breath. Daniel shot to his feet. "This is insane." "Sit down, Daniel," Charles said firmly. This document is notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. Daniel's face flushed red. She's not even a Beaumont. You expect me to believe? The DNA results were conclusive, Charles interrupted. Your father ordered them weeks before his passing. They confirm her identity beyond question. Evelyn slammed her gloved hand against the table. This is humiliation. You can't tarnish his legacy with this child born out of sin. Lily rose slowly, her eyes steady, her voice quiet but firm. Sin? My mother raised me alone while your family buried her in lies. If that's sin, maybe she was the only honest one among you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to hurt. Daniel's voice lowered to a dangerous calm. This isn't over. You'll see to that, won't you, Mother? Evelyn didn't respond, but her eyes flicked toward me cold, calculating. Charles closed the folder. The remaining 10% of Mr. Beaumont's estate will go to Nurse Anna Miller in acknowledgement of her service and integrity. He described her as, and I quote, the last person who looked at me without seeing a bank account. Every head turned toward me. I froze. I don't want his money, I said quietly. I only wanted him to have peace. Daniel smirked. Don't flatter yourself. You were just convenient. Before I could speak, Lily stood up. You don't get to talk to her like that. He turned to her, anger flashing. You don't get to tell me anything, sister. The word dripped with venom. Lily didn't flinch. I didn't ask for your name. I just inherited the truth you tried to bury. Daniel's chair screeched as he stood again. You think this changes anything? You're nothing but a headline, a scandal that will fade. I'll fight this in court until you're begging to walk away. She stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you can buy silence, Daniel, but you can't buy peace. For a moment, they stood face to face, two reflections of the same bloodline divided by the lies that built their family. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn spoke. Enough, she said. Her voice trembled for the first time. Your father made his choices. Let the dead keep their secrets. Charles gathered the documents. The proceedings are complete. As everyone began to leave, Daniel lingered near the door, his voice low as he passed me. You may think you've won, Nurse Miller, but this family doesn't lose. I looked at him steadily. Neither does the truth. When he was gone, the room fell silent except for the rain starting again against the windows. Lily walked over to the fireplace, her fingers brushing the photo of her mother and father. He really did love her, she whispered. Yes, I said, in his own broken way. She turned to me, tears glistening. What do I do now? Live, I said softly. That's what they never let her do freely. You owe her that much. Outside, thunder rolled again. Not the wild kind that destroys, but the soft kind that reminds you storms always leave something behind, cleaner air, clearer skies, and a truth that refuses to stay buried. That night I couldn't sleep. The storm outside the Beaumont estate had passed, but its echo stayed with me. Rainwater still ran down the long glass windows, reflecting the chandelier light like tears. The will had been read, the truth spoken aloud, yet something in my chest refused to rest. Lily had left earlier, needing air. She said she wanted to walk by the river her father used to overlook from his office. Daniel and Evelyn had retreated upstairs, the silence of pride heavier than grief. The house was too big for anyone's comfort now, a cathedral of guilt and inheritance. I stayed in the library. I don't know why. Maybe because the air still smelled faintly of Richard's cigar smoke, and maybe because I wasn't ready to leave the story halfway told. The lawyer, Charles, had gone too, but before leaving, he had slipped a small sealed envelope into my hand. He left this for you, he'd said quietly. He didn't want it read publicly. Now, alone in that golden silence, I opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten in the same shaky script I'd come to recognize during his last days. Anna, if you're reading this, it means you stayed, like you always did. Thank you. But there's something you must know. The will you heard was not the last one. There's another hidden version kept with my lawyer for safety. The one read aloud protects Lily, but it doesn't tell her everything. The truth isn't just that she's my daughter, it's that she's already part of this family in ways none of them understand. My hands trembled. Years ago, before I left Maria, I made a mistake. I signed a trust fund under another name to protect her child from my own relatives. That fund grew quietly. It owns shares in Beaumont Holdings through a shell company named after her mother, M. Lawson Enterprises. That company holds 45% of the business itself. My breath caught. 45% more than any living Beaumont, including Daniel. Daniel thinks money is control. What he doesn't realize is that his own board already answers to her. She doesn't just inherit the family fortune, Anna. She already owns it. I lowered the paper, my mind spinning. The quiet had changed shape. All those years, Richard had played a longer game, hiding Lily not to shame her, but to protect her from the wolves wearing his name. And now, in death, he had turned their power against them. I folded the letter back into its envelope, my heart pounding. I needed to find Lily. She had to know before Daniel did. When I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Someone was standing by the stairs. Daniel. His face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. "You're still here," he said quietly. I was about to leave. His gaze flicked to the letter in my hand. "What's that?" "Something your father left me." He stepped closer, too close. "You know, I've been thinking. You've made quite a career out of inserting yourself into other people's lives." "I'm just keeping a promise," I said. "To him? Or to her?" His voice sharpened. "Because whatever that girl thinks she's getting, it's not going to last. The board won't let her run a company she doesn't understand." "She doesn't want to run it," I said. "She just wants peace." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Peace is for people who don't have to fight for survival." He turned to leave, but then paused. "Be careful, Anna. You're playing in a world that buries people quietly." After he disappeared down the hall, I exhaled, my knees weak. The letter in my hand felt like a weapon, and I wasn't sure yet which side it would wound. Outside, thunder rumbled again. I hurried into the night, the cold air biting my cheeks as I ran toward the river. Lily was standing there alone under a flickering streetlight, her coat drawn tight against the wind. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep either?" "No," I said, catching my breath. "But I found something your father didn't tell anyone." She turned, curious but wary. "Another secret?" I handed her the letter. The real will wasn't the one we heard today. She read it slowly, the words catching in her throat. When she reached the line about the trust fund, her hands trembled. He made me the majority owner?" I nodded. "Through your mother's name, you've owned nearly half of Beaumont Holdings for years and didn't even know it." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "Why would he do that?" "To protect you," I said softly. "He didn't want you to be a target while he was alive, but now—" Lily stared out over the water. "Now they'll come for me." "Maybe," I said. "But now you have something they never will, the truth, and the power to use it differently." She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears that refused to fall. "He spent a lifetime hiding me just so he could give me everything." "Yes," I said. "And in the process, he might have given you the one thing he never had: freedom." We stood there in silence for a while, the city lights trembling on the river's surface. Somewhere behind us, the Beaumont mansion loomed like a monument to everything broken and beautiful about human ambition. Lily folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her coat. "Daniel won't stop," she said. "You know that." "I know," I said. "But maybe this time he's fighting someone who doesn't need his name to win." She smiled then, small but real. "You're staying, right? For as long as it takes," I said. "Your father trusted me to see this through." The wind carried the faint chime of the church bell in the distance midnight. And in that moment, standing beside the daughter of the man whose sins had built an empire, I understood the strange symmetry of it all. The nurse who had no family left, and the daughter who had only just discovered hers. The world would remember Richard Beaumont for his wealth, his scandal, his fall, but I would remember him for the single truth he left behind. That sometimes the deepest love is not the one that saves you, but the one that makes sure you'll never be forgotten. The morning after the storm, Boston was bathed in a gray, silver light that made everything look both new and old at once, like the world couldn't decide whether to begin again or stay grieving. The news had spread faster than we could breathe. Every headline carried Lily's name now. "Secret heiress inherits Beaumont legacy. Love child now controls $400 million empire. The nurse behind the family scandal." Every photo they used of her was cruel, snapped outside the hospital, her face pale, her eyes tired. And mine, too. Someone had caught me walking beside her that night by the river, my hand on her shoulder. They called me the caretaker who started it all. For a woman who had lived in silence for most of her life, suddenly, I was everywhere. By noon, the media was camped outside my apartment. They shouted questions as I walked to my car. Did you have an affair with Richard Beaumont? Did you manipulate him on his deathbed? Asterisk. Are you part of Lily Lawson's legal team? Asterisk. I didn't answer. Truth doesn't survive when it's shouted through microphones. When I reached the Beaumont estate, the gate was closed, guarded by men in dark suits. But one of them recognized me. She's expecting you, he said, opening it just enough for me to pass. Inside, the air was tense. Lily sat in the library by the same fireplace where her father's portrait hung. Her face was pale, her hair pulled back, and her phone screen glowed with messages and missed calls. Reporters won't stop, she said quietly. Somebody leaked the new will. Daniel, I said without hesitation. She nodded. He's furious. He's filing a suit claiming my mother forged documents. He says the trust fund is fraudulent. He's desperate, I said. That means he's scared. She looked up at me. I don't want any of this, Anna. The money. The company, it's poison. I just wanted to know the truth. I sat beside her. Truth comes with a price. The question is whether you can live with it. She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. My mother used to say, when the truth costs too much, it's because you waited too long to buy it. Maybe she was right. The sound of footsteps interrupted us. Daniel entered, his face tight, the exhaustion of sleepless nights etched into his jaw. He looked at Lily, then at me. Congratulations, he said dryly. You've both managed to destroy a legacy. You mean expose it? I said. He ignored me, walking straight to his sister. Lily, listen to me. You think you've won something, but you have no idea how this world works. You'll be eaten alive by it. I already was, she said softly. You just never noticed. He flinched at that, then recovered. The board is meeting next week. They won't accept you as majority owner. They'll demand you step down. You can save yourself if you sign over your shares to me. Why? She asked. So you can keep pretending you built this empire on integrity? Daniel's nostrils flared. I built it on survival. And she built it on love, I said. Maybe that's why it's still standing. He turned toward me sharply. You've done enough damage. Walk away. I can't, I said, because I promised your father I'd stay until he found peace. Peace? Daniel scoffed. He's dead. No, I said quietly. Peace doesn't mean living. It means being understood. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw something in his face, a flicker of pain, or maybe memory. He looked like a boy again, one who had spent his whole life trying to be seen by a father too busy chasing power. Do you even remember him before the money? I asked. Before all this? Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He turned away. I remember watching him leave. And now you've done the same, I said. You're leaving, Daniel, just in a different way. He didn't answer. He simply walked to the door, his voice low. This isn't over. When he was gone, Lily's hands began to shake. He'll destroy me. I took her hand. No, he'll try. But your father made sure you'd never be powerless again. She exhaled shakily. What if I don't want power? Then use it to give back what this family took, I said. Turn it into something that matters. She looked at me, her eyes clearing through the tears. Like what? Something your mother would have believed in. Something your father could never buy. That evening, she made her decision. By dawn, the news broke again, this time with her voice behind it. She called a press conference in front of the Beaumont Foundation building. Cameras flashed as she stood before the microphones, her posture calm, her face unreadable. My father's legacy was built on silence, she began. But silence is not loyalty, it's fear. I am not here to inherit his empire. I am here to rebuild it into something worthy of forgiveness. I'm establishing a new branch of the Beaumont Foundation in my mother's name, the Maria Lawson Trust, for single mothers, for forgotten children, for those left behind. The crowd erupted. Behind the cameras, I stood and watched her, the daughter of a man who had spent a lifetime hiding his mistakes, now facing the world with nothing but truth in her hands. For the first time, I felt something in me settle, a quiet kind of pride. Later, when the crowd dispersed, she turned to me. Do you think he'd be proud? I smiled. He already was. He just didn't know how to say it. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. You were his redemption, Anna, not me. I shook my head. No, Lily. You were his reason. I was just the witness. As we stood there, the late sunlight breaking through the clouds, I realized this was the moment everything had been leading to, not money, not revenge, but understanding. And yet deep down I also knew peace never comes without cost. Because in giving her the truth, I had made an enemy powerful enough to bury us both. And Daniel Beaumont wasn't done yet. It had been 6 weeks since the press conference, and Boston had slowly begun to move on, as cities do. Headlines fade, gossip changes shape, and even scandal becomes a kind of background noise. But for those of us inside the story, there was no moving on, only surviving it. Lily's foundation had launched officially. Donations poured in from all over the country. People admired her grace, her humility, her refusal to become the kind of heiress the tabloids wanted her to be. But for every dollar raised, a threat found its way to her inbox. Anonymous messages, warnings, legal letters. Daniel's doing, of course. He had lost the company's majority, but not his appetite for control. He began to play a different game, quieter, meaner. Rumors about forged wills, about me taking money to manipulate Richard. Some nights, I'd catch a black car idling near my apartment, engine running, headlights off. Still, we kept going. Lily and I met every morning at the foundation office, working through grant proposals, charity plans, and endless press requests. The work kept her steady, and maybe me too. One afternoon, while she was reviewing applications, her phone rang. She frowned at the screen. It's him. Don't answer, I said. But she did. Daniel's voice crackled through the speaker, low and cutting. Congratulations, little sister. I saw your interview. You almost sound like you believe what you're selling. What do you want? Lily asked. Nothing, he said. I just thought you should know the board is calling an emergency meeting next week. They're contesting the trust transfer. Once they do, your assets are frozen. Your little charity will die before it starts. You can't touch it, she said evenly. It's protected under federal registration. He laughed softly. Protected? You really think paper can save you? Everyone has a price, Lily. I just have to find the right person to collect yours. The line went dead. For a long time, she stared at the phone, her face pale. Then she looked at me. He's not bluffing. No, I said quietly. He never does. That night, I stayed at her apartment. She didn't ask, but I knew she was afraid. I was too. When someone like Daniel loses power, he doesn't mourn it, he hunts it down. The next morning, I went to the hospital for a short shift. I hadn't worked full-time since Richard's death, but I still covered the ICU, sometimes habit, maybe guilt. When I walked in, Mrs. Gordon stopped me in the hallway. Anna, she said carefully, you need to come to my office. Inside, 2 men in dark suits were waiting. Miss Miller? One asked, flashing a badge. Federal investigators, we're here about the Beaumont estate. My stomach dropped. What about it? There's an allegation that you were involved in document tampering and unlawful transfer of medical records. I stared at them. That's absurd. Perhaps, the agent said, but we'll need your statement. I sat down slowly, my pulse hammering. Daniel had finally found his angle. After hours of questions and signatures, they left. Mrs. Gordon looked at me, her eyes sad. Anna, you should hire a lawyer. By the time I reached the foundation office, the story was already online. Beaumont nurse under investigation in will scandal. Lily looked up from her desk, horrified. He did this. Yes, I said. And he won't stop until one of us breaks. That night, she called a friend, a corporate lawyer named Sophia Reyes. Together, we planned our response. Gather every document, every email, every handwritten note Richard had left. Build a wall of truth so high that even Daniel's lies couldn't climb it. But the man was clever. 2 days later, someone leaked private photos, pictures of Richard and me during his final weeks. One showed me holding his hand. Another captured me crying beside his bed. The captions were cruel. Intimate connection. The nurse who seduced a dying billionaire. It went viral within hours. I shut off my phone, my computer, everything. For the first time since his death, I felt ashamed not because of what I had done, but because truth was no longer enough to protect me. That night, Lily showed up at my apartment, rain-soaked and furious. I went to his office, she said breathlessly. I told him to stop. What happened? She hesitated. He laughed, said it was business, not personal. I sighed. With Daniel, it's always personal. She sat down across from me. Anna, I can't live like this watching everything he destroys. Maybe I should just walk away. No, I said firmly. If you walk away, he wins, and your father's truth dies with him. Her voice cracked. What if that truth already costs too much? I reached across the table, taking her hand. Then let it cost me instead. She shook her head. No more sacrifices, Anna. We end this together. We stayed up until dawn going through Richard's documents, cross-checking dates, scanning letters. And that's when I found a handwritten note folded between the pages of his trust file. If my sons ever question the legitimacy of my will, refer them to file R1796. The truth was documented long before the money existed. I frowned. What's file R1796? Sophia looked up. That's a corporate archive number. If it's real, it's registered with the state. The next day, we searched. And we found it. A sealed corporate registration, dated 1,995 years before Daniel or the board had any power. It showed the ownership transfer of Beaumont Holdings stock to M. Lawson Enterprises, legally binding, irrevocable. It was bulletproof. We submitted the file to the court that week. 2 days later, the federal investigation was dropped. My name was cleared. Daniel's case collapsed. His lawyers withdrew. The board reinstated Lily's full authority over the company. But victories like that don't feel like triumph. They feel like exhaustion with a heartbeat. When I saw Daniel next, it was outside the courthouse. He looked smaller somehow, his suit wrinkled, his arrogance cracked. You ruined everything, he said quietly. No, I said. Your father did that years ago. We just finished the story he started. He stared at me for a long time, eyes hollow. You think this makes you the hero? No, I said softly. I think it makes you free, if you ever decide to be. He turned away. I don't know how. And for the first time, I almost pitied him. That night, Lily and I sat by the river again, the same spot where her father had once confessed his truth. The city lights rippled across the water like fading ghosts. I don't know what comes next, she said. Maybe peace, I said. She smiled faintly. You really think peace exists for people like us? Sometimes, I said. Sometimes it's just a quiet night without regret. She nodded. Then tonight I'll take that. We sat in silence, the world soft around us. For the first time in months, the air felt still like maybe, finally, the storm had decided to move on. But in my heart, I knew peace never stays long, not in stories like ours. It was autumn again when I finally returned to the hospital. The air smelled of rain and fading leaves, and the world had learned to say Richard Beaumont's name softly now, as if it belonged to a history that had already forgiven itself. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest edges. The headlines had quieted, the lawsuits had ended. The world, always hungry for a new scandal, had moved on to fresher tragedies. But we hadn't. Lily still ran the foundation. Every morning she opened her office window to the city and said it helped her breathe. The Maria Lawson Trust had already funded dozens of shelters across the country, safe havens for women and children, like the ones her mother once dreamed of helping. She never took the Beaumont name. On every official document, on every plaque, it read simply, Lily Lawson. Daniel, after losing everything, disappeared from Boston society. Some said he'd gone to Europe. Others whispered that he'd sold his remaining shares to pay off debts. I never saw him again, though sometimes when the wind moved through the city's alleyways at night, I'd swear I could still hear his voice, the brittle sound of pride cracking under its own weight. And me? I went back to being a nurse. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't stop being one. Caring for people, even strangers, it was the only thing that ever felt like home. I didn't need the money Richard left me. I donated most of it quietly to the trust. Lily protested at first, but I told her truth should always keep giving. She smiled and said, then we'll build something that never forgets where it came from. One evening, months later, she called me to the river. The same place where she had met her father for the first and last time. The air was cool, the water silver under the streetlights. She handed me a small box, tied with a faded red ribbon. "I found this when we moved the foundation archives," she said. Inside was a silver locket, old and slightly tarnished. I opened it and found 2 tiny photos, one of Richard in his youth and one of Maria holding baby Lily. On the back, engraved in careful script, were 4 words: "Forgiveness is its own fortune." I felt my throat tighten. "He must have ordered this before he died." She nodded. "He never got to give it to me." I placed it in her hand. "Then it's time he did." She hesitated, eyes glistening. "Do you ever stop thinking about him?" "No," I said softly. "But I've stopped trying to rewrite what's already written." We stood there for a while, watching the city lights ripple on the water. Somewhere a church bell rang, just like the night of his confession. "I used to hate him," Lily said quietly. "Now I think I just understand him. Maybe that's worse." "Understanding always costs more than anger," I said. "But it's the only currency that buys peace." She looked at me, a faint smile breaking through. "You sound like him sometimes." "Maybe," I said. "But I like to think he borrowed his better lines from people like us." The wind picked up then, scattering the leaves across the riverbank. Lily unclasped the locket and held it above the water. "He said this belonged to love," she whispered. Then she let it fall. It hit the water softly, sank beneath the ripples, and was gone. We watched in silence until the circles disappeared, until the night was still again. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "You know, Anna, people keep telling me I'm rich now, but I don't feel it." "You are," I said, "just not in the way they measure it." She smiled faintly. "What about you? Are you at peace?" I looked at the river, at the city, at the faint light of the hospital glowing across the distance like a memory that refused to dim. "Peace?" I murmured. "Maybe not, but I've learned to live gently with what hurts." She took my hand, squeezing it. "That's enough." We stood there until the cold began to bite, until the lights along the river flickered one by one into darkness. As we walked back toward the city, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The surface of the water was calm now, but beneath it, somewhere deep, where the light couldn't reach, the locket waited, holding its secret promise. Not redemption, not revenge. Just the quiet truth of 2 broken lives that somehow found their way back to meaning. And maybe that was all any of us ever got. Maybe that was what forgiveness really looked like.